that you can all take part in. Nathan Young from Divine Cakes and Desserts in Christchurch. Welcome to the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Wallace. It's great to be on board with you guys this afternoon.
So, tell us about the competition.
Yeah, hey, we saw a great opportunity, obviously, with the lockdown. We're watching a lot of the news, and we just couldn't get over how much flour and how many baking ingredients were being sold out at the supermarket. We're sitting there at home going, what's people doing with all this? What are they doing? And we're a business that's all about celebrating people's special events, their birthdays and their weddings and so forth. And we really miss that whole interaction with our customers at this point in time. So we came up with the idea that we'll run a competition and see what our customers are making at home. And so far, the uptake's just been huge. At the moment, we're sitting around a couple of hundred entrants.
What?
And I know, it's unbelievable. And
what are they making? What are they making, Nathan?
What are they making? Oh, they're making everything. So, chocolate chip cookie cake was one of the big ones yesterday. Your typical apple shortcake, lemon meringue pies. Seriously, it's with all the activities going on, I think we're certainly making New Zealand fatter, not fitter at the moment. But it's a bloody good way of doing it.
Look, Nathan, we've got to squeeze this in before we go. 3 categories for people to enter: solo up to 12 years, family any age, and solo any age. The entries close on April the 19th. Can people around the country enter?
Yeah, definitely. So we've had a few entrants from the North Island, so we were happy to take them on board. And the best thing is the winning overall entrant as well. We're going to look at replicating that product at our Divine Bakehouse and then selling it as well for the first month of lockdown, once we're out of lockdown. And what we'll do as well, so 25% of all the proceeds of that product we'll donate to a charity that the winner will choose as well. So.
All right, good on you there. Nathan Young from Divine Cakes and Desserts in Christchurch. There, everyone's available to enter. 3 categories: apple shortbread. Ali Moore, I could be a taster.
Yeah, doesn't that sound marvellous?
Yes.
If you follow me on Twitter, which I know you do, Wallace, you'll have seen that I've been baking too. I think it's a comfort thing, and it was a way that I used when my kids were little. It was particularly when my kids were teens, it was a method that I used to connect with them even when they, didn't particularly want to hang out with their mum. If you'd had a fight during the week, I would suggest a Sunday baking session, and you could just kind of be together in the kitchen, standing beside each other, but not necessarily face to face. It was really helpful for maintaining that bond. So, yeah, we've always been bakers, and I have to date made ginger biscuits.
So ginger, yes,
like
please.
Like a homemade, what do they call them? Ginger...
Squares, ginger...
Cakes?
No. What's the...
Bread.
What's the kiwi Becky that we all love? My God, I've had a mental blank. Anyway,
pop it on I've done ginger nuts. Thank you, Kaz. Ginger nuts.
Thank you. Ginger nuts, like a homemade ginger nut. And I've also made a cinnamon scroll kind of scone thing, glaze. That was really nice.
Hungry now. Ginger nuts and batch bread. What a delicious panel combo. Alan McElroy and... very much for being with me on the panel this afternoon. Thanks to my producers. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then. Checkpoint is next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Hariaki nei, the beach walk of shame. David Clark holds on to his job as Health Minister but slides to the bottom of the Cabinet rankings. The PM wanted to sack him, but she says she had a bigger duty of care to New Zealand. Today's numbers: 54 new confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19. It is the lowest increase since the lockdown started, but comes with a warning to stay the course. We talked to the lawyers looking to sue the owners of the Ruby Princess cruise ship crawling with coronavirus. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains in intensive care after his condition deteriorated overnight. And Australian Cardinal George Pell walks free from prison after the court quashes his child sex abuse convictions.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister is expressing confidence and cautious optimism in the downward trend of new coronavirus cases. Another 54 people were today classified as confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19, the lowest daily figure in 2 weeks. That compares to 65 more people who are deemed to have recovered from the virus in the past 24 hours. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he's increasingly confident the lockdown is working, and Jacinda Ardern has reiterated that.
Quietly confident and cautiously optimistic.
The total number of cases sits at 1,160. 12 people are in hospital, with one in critical condition. More than half of the new COVID-19 cases confirmed in New Zealand today are linked to clusters across the country. The Ministry of Health earlier announced 54 new confirmed and probable cases of the infectious disease, 28 of which stem from pre-existing clusters. Katie Scotcher reports.
The ministry says 11 more cases of COVID-19 have been linked to a wedding in Bluff, bringing the total number to 73. New Zealand's biggest cluster at Auckland's Marist College has also seen an increase of cases, with 5 more confirmed in the last 24 hours. The ministry says 77 people with links to the school have so far tested positive for the infectious disease. The number of cases linked to an international cattle conference in Queenstown, an Auckland workplace, an event in Auckland, and a group travelling to the United States has also risen slightly. Ko Katie Scotcher aho.
The Prime Minister says at any other time she would have sacked the Health Minister for breaching lockdown rules, but it would have been too disruptive in the middle of the COVID crisis. David Clark will keep his position for now after admitting to driving 20 kilometres to a beach for a walk on the first weekend of the Level 4 alert. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Minister has apologised and offered his resignation. Jacinda Ardern says his actions are unacceptable and has stripped him of his cabinet ranking and associate finance portfolio. But David Clark will stay on as Health Minister, as Ms Ardern says she needs his knowledge not only of the response but the broader health sector. National agrees with her decision, but leader Simon Bridges says Dr Clark's position will be terminal once the lockdown is over. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A new study has found pregnant women don't seem to be more susceptible to COVID-19 than other people. The study, published in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, looked at data from 43 pregnant women in New York who have tested positive. Unlike in SARS and flu cases, there's no evidence the impact of the disease is greater, nor have any women passed the infection on to their babies. New World or Pack and Save stores will need to withdraw any wage subsidy applications and pay back any government funding granted. More than $622,000 have been paid across 2 New World stores to support 91 workers. Foodstuffs New Zealand's head of corporate affairs, Antoinette Laird, says owners realise they have a privileged ability to trade during the lockdown. Instead of the subsidy, Ms Laird says the North and South Island cooperatives will support individual stores that have been affected. However, she says Foursquare stores can continue to apply for the subsidy, as some have lost up to 70% of their revenue. One of the country's largest indoor stadiums has been turned into a food bank to help feed thousands of households requesting assistance during the lockdown. Auckland Council has set up a food distribution centre at Spark Arena, providing emergency food parcels on behalf of the government. Anyone who is unable to go to the supermarket or is suffering financial hardship as a result of the lockdown is eligible for the food parcels, which are being couriered to people's homes. The council has had about 3,000 requests for the food parcels since the service began operating last week. Police will be on the roads over Easter to stop any holidaymakers breaching the directives to stay at home this holiday weekend. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the movement restrictions are the same this weekend as any other during Alert Level 4, meaning batches and holiday homes are off limits. The Northland District Commander, Tony Hill, says police will also be ensuring people aren't heading out on the water for any activities, including fishing and swimming, which are prohibited. It's 5:04. To sport now. Crusaders rugby players have been scolded by New Zealand Rugby and the Prime Minister after they were seen training alongside each other at a public park in Christchurch. All Black Richie Maunga was among the players who broke the government's lockdown rules by throwing a ball to his teammates who are not part of his bubble. Maunga says it was not an organised training and it was a coincidence he rocked up to the same local park on Monday.
As I arrived, I answered the boys from afar, asking how they were and went about my running session. As I'd finished one of my running sessions, The ball had been kicked over, and instinctively I went and picked the ball up and threw it back to them. I will say that was the only interaction I had with them, apart from talking to them.
Richie Mo'unga. Facing a backlash from angry NRL clubs and fans, the Australian Rugby League Commission Chairman Peter V'landys has stepped in to abort a plan to start the 2020 competition from scratch when it resumes. If the Warriors are able to compete in the NRL when play gets underway after the current shutdown, their 2 losses from the opening 2 rounds will still count. That's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. Be kind. If you see someone out and about, remember that most New Zealanders are doing their bit and are probably just getting exercise or picking up supplies. Feel free to smile and wave. Keep a 2-metre distance and don't stop to chat. You need to stay in your household, stay home and stay local. You can still celebrate Easter this weekend with your loved ones, church or community using video chat, email, texting or calling. We're all in this together, and while we need to be physically apart, it's important to continue to be connected. Go to covid19.govt.nz for more information.
Now the short forecast taking us through to midnight tomorrow Wednesday. Northland to Waikato, that includes Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty. Isolated showers, widespread for a time tomorrow, possibly heavy in Northland. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud, showers from around midday tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, including central high country, also Waited Upper. Isolated showers today. Rain for a time in the morning tomorrow, then mainly fine. Kapiti to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, apart from the Kaikoura coast. Isolated showers. Rain for a time this evening, becoming fine tomorrow. Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, isolated showers clearing north of Christchurch in the morning. Otago, a few showers, mainly coastal, clearing this evening. Showers returning tomorrow evening. Bulla and Westland, mainly fine, but the odd shower about Bulla. Cloud and showers spreading again north tomorrow afternoon and evening. Fiordland and Southland, showers mainly about the coast, becoming more widespread, possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, the odd shower, rain later tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The Health Minister, David Clark, will keep his job for now after breaching the lockdown rules, but the Prime Minister says if it had been any other time, he would have been sacked. Dr Clark has admitted acting like an idiot, saying he let the team down after driving his family 20 kilometres to a beach for a walk on the first weekend of the lockdown. He'd already apologised for driving a few kilometres in his branded electric van to a mountain bike track in Dunedin. Meanwhile, there are another 54 confirmed or probable cases of coronavirus today, the lowest number since exactly 2 weeks ago when 50 were recorded. And more people have now recovered from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours than have tested positive. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern addressed the David Clark controversy at the start of today's media briefing.
Under normal circumstances, I would sack the minister. What he did was wrong, and there are no excuses. But my priority above all else is our collective fight against COVID-19.
She says she needs someone not only with a deep knowledge of the COVID response, but also the wider health system and its workforce.
Simply put, I determined that we cannot afford massive disruption in the health sector or to our response, because David Clark continues to possess what we require as our Health Minister to take on COVID-19.
The National Party leader Simon Bridges backs her decision, but only for the duration of the lockdown.
The situation she's in, where she and New Zealand are in the middle of a health and economic crisis like we've never seen in our lifetimes, and so to change ministers right at the moment, I can understand why she wouldn't. That said, his position, I think, more medium term is terminal.
And this morning, the online hearings of Parliament's Epidemic Committee rolled on, with Dr Clark among those appearing.
I do want to put on record at the outset my clear regret. I know I have stuffed up in the last week. I have let New Zealanders down, and I've apologised to the Prime Minister, and I do apologise to the public. I did offer my resignation to the Prime Minister last night for having broken the rules of the Level 4 alert lockdown.
But that was it. No questions from opposition MPs about his misstep. However, questions were raised about whether Dr Clark was up to the job after he deferred to the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, several times.
So I expect Dr Bloomfield can tell us a little more about the work that's going on at the Ministry around surveillance. It's of course a challenge.
Well, shouldn't you be able to tell us? You're the Minister of Health.
Dr Bloomfield was also asked about mandatory quarantining at the border, with people returning from overseas a high-risk group. He defended the border controls, describing them as strong, but told MPs other options are being considered.
Under the current arrangements, there are really clear expectations, and there have been for some weeks. The vast majority of people understand and comply with those expectations.
Jacinda Ardern says stronger border measures, including compulsory quarantine, were discussed by ministers this morning.
Well, I think you've seen from every decision we've made at the border that we see it as an ongoing point of risk. And so we want to make sure that we remove that risk as much as possible. That's why we've only continued to ramp up. So quite frankly, regardless of the enforcement, I really want a watertight system at our border.
The National Party wants every person arriving in New Zealand tested and quarantined for at least 14 days.
It is entirely manageable from right now, where it's 200-300 people coming in, to have them in specified facilities where we know where they are, where they're not going to the supermarket and doing other things, and we know they have a heightened risk.
Epidemiologist Professor David Skegg told the committee it's vital New Zealand does not import more cases.
The arrangements for quarantine at the border have clearly not worked in the way that was planned with the best of intentions. If these are not tightened urgently, the lockdown will have to be extended.
Meanwhile, the government will now allow foreign nationals to transit through airports in this country if they need to get home under strict rules, as governments around the world struggle to repatriate their citizens. New Zealand is seeking similar agreements with a range of countries to help its own nationals stuck overseas. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
An entire sports stadium in Auckland has been transformed into a food bank to help feed thousands of households going hungry during the lockdown. As New Zealand's cases of COVID-19 start to level out, the number of people struggling to get food on the table isn't letting up. Auckland Council's service to supply food parcels has received thousands of requests for help, with more pouring in every day. It's now set up a food distribution centre at Spark Arena to keep up with demand. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person went along to take a look.
The largest indoor venue in the country, now ground zero for getting food to the thousands in need. In lieu of concert goers or sports fans, pallets of food fill Spark Arena. The scenes show the scale of hardship. Arena staff constantly circle the floor, filling trolleys with the basics that many households can't afford.
I think we're in totally uncharted territory, and to have something like this food distribution centre that today will probably package up 1,500 packages of food really is unprecedented.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says 3,000 people have called the council's 0800 number asking for food parcels since last Wednesday. Older people who can't access supermarkets, those with disabilities, as well as people struggling financially are all eligible for help.
We take the calls using council staff at our contact centre. They've been trained to ask the questions, establish the need. The orders are put through here. We've got the Spark Arena and its staff doing the packaging, Countdown supplying the goods, New Zealand couriers delivering to the door, and the process is being paid for with funding from central government.
The food packages are filled with the basics: pasta, rice, cans of veggies and some toiletries, and are dropped to homes by New Zealand couriers. Phil Goff says while times are tough, no one should be going hungry.
What we're trying to do is bridge the situation from loss of job, applying for state assistance in terms of income support, and in the delay that causes, making sure that people aren't suffering in between. And we're finding people, a woman that said to us the other day, look, I really feel bad about this. I've never had to ask for help before, but my husband's lost his job, we don't have backup savings, and we're really desperate for food.
It's been a massive logistical undertaking to get the arena set up. Everyone heading in has to have their temperature taken, hand sanitised and PPE applied. They simply cannot afford to have the operation compromised. But Managing Director Stuart Klumpus says they've adapted quickly.
A couple of the arenas in Europe have started to be used for makeshift hospitals, so we'd already got our heads around the idea if we'd get asked to be a makeshift hospital, and we're already kind of gearing up. We didn't quite expect this, but hey, we're really pleased to be part of helping. And it's a big place, there's plenty of space to stay 2 metres away from everyone.
The scale of operation here absolutely cannot be overstated. This entire arena has been transformed into a food warehouse filled with hundreds of pallets of food, filling thousands of boxes. And just to give you a sense, 2,000 boxes here behind me alone. Every single one of those represents a hungry person or household that's in need.
Costs for the operation are predicted to be in the millions, and the service is expected to last as long as the lockdown goes on. Of course, the struggle isn't limited to Auckland. Food banks right across the country are recording massive demand for help. Stuart Klumpus says the economic impact of the lockdown is huge.
As a cautious Scotsman, I'm always expecting the next day to be a rainy day, and this is more like a complete bloody monsoon than a rainy day, but nonetheless. So far so good, but it's hard. It's hard when you have to stop economically.
Hard times that he hopes can only get better. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blakeperson aho.
Help is on the way for dozens of New Zealanders stuck in Peru, with details being finalised for a government-chartered Mercy flight. Questions remain about whether more flights can be arranged, but some stranded travellers have been able to nab seats on charter flights being arranged by other countries. Our reporter Sarah Robson has more.
Talia Loughlin from Taupo has been in Peru since August, teaching English in the northern city of Cajamarca. Initially, she wasn't too worried about getting out of Peru, but now she's pretty keen to get back to New Zealand on the charter flight being organised by the government.
My mum's worried. Not gonna lie. And my family's been really good in terms of when I brought this flight up, or this flight option, they've started to rally together and to try and help me get home.
Talia Loughlin says while she's in a better situation than many other New Zealanders in Peru, her prospects for getting home on a commercial flight anytime soon don't look good.
I was looking at the future plans in terms of flights out of Peru at later dates, and I would be stuck here until July or later because Air New Zealand has shut down majority of the flight paths, same with Qantas and other airline companies that fly to New Zealand.
Talia Loughlin is now just waiting to see if she can actually make the 16-hour trip to Lima to join the 70 other New Zealanders registered for the flight. A seat on it will cost just over $5,000, but the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government is picking up some of the tab.
It does not cover the full cost of getting these New Zealanders out. I should be very clear on that. We are underwriting the cost of getting them out. They are being charged for the tickets, but not at the full rate of, not full cost recovery.
Jacinda Ardern says if people are struggling to pay for the flight, there could be some help available under certain circumstances.
They include, for instance, if someone has absolutely no financial ability to extract themselves from a country. Those are made all on a case-by-case basis by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade on the ground.
The flight from Peru was announced yesterday afternoon, and by this morning about 68 people had registered for it. When exactly it will depart is still being finalised. About 300 New Zealanders stranded in various parts of the world have managed to make it home with the help of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, says diplomats and officials have been working around the clock.
We've got people out of Kathmandu, Nepal, we've got them from Montevideo in Uruguay, we brought them back from Switzerland. Dare I say, just the other day from Austria, when they were in quarantine in Tyrol, we got 11 New Zealanders out.
Winston Peters says where they can, they'll continue working with other governments to try and get more New Zealanders home. Seth Reid, who's been stuck in Costa Rica, was pinning his hopes on a German repatriation flight. The Auckland man had resigned himself to spending months in Costa Rica until he heard through the grapevine there were empty seats on the flight to Frankfurt. He's on the plane now, but right up until the last minute, he was nervous he wouldn't make it.
There's no real reason, like, I'm on the flight. The Germans have said it's okay. I've got all the paperwork. I've got a flight home. It's been bad luck so far, so I'm just sort of nervous. And then, as everyone is also nervous, I'm suddenly like, what if I wake up with a real bad fever and then they won't let me on the flight because I'm sick or something like that? That's my latest fear.
Once he makes it to Frankfurt, he'll get on a Qatar Airways flight via Doha all the way back to New Zealand. Meanwhile, the government has announced today that foreign nationals will be able to transit through New Zealand to connect to commercial or evacuation flights home. There will be strict criteria determining who is able to transit, and they must remain airside at airports and not enter the country. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It is 21 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. Let us know what you think about the so-called demotion of David Clark as Health Minister. He's gone to the bottom of the heap in Cabinet. Was it a pragmatic call from the Prime Minister, or has his actions undermined his credibility in the role? You can text us your thoughts on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The British government is without its figurehead, who remains in intensive care in a London hospital. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, had been admitted to hospital yesterday with a persistent cough and temperature, more than a week after he tested positive for coronavirus. This morning, his condition worsened. He's been given oxygen and is close to ventilators should he need them. It is a grave moment in the country's history. The BBC's political editor, Laura Koonsberg, filed this report.
Less than a mile from Downing Street, Boris Johnson is in intensive care tonight in a personal fight against the virus that the government and the country is trying to beat. Who'd have known on Thursday night that the health workers he applauded would be caring for him like this? Brief glimpses of Boris Johnson on social media made it clear he was struggling to shake the virus off.
My 7 days of isolation, alas, I still have one of the symptoms, a minor symptom of I still have a temperature, and so...
Now, after being admitted to hospital last night for tests, he is conscious, but as a precaution, Downing Street says has been moved to intensive care. And the Foreign Secretary has been asked to step up for now.
During the course of this afternoon, the Prime Minister's condition worsened, and on the advice of the medical team, he was moved in to a critical care unit.
With the Prime Minister now in intensive care, this is obviously an extremely serious situation. I mean, how worried should people be about his health and about who's in charge of the government?
Well, the government's business will continue, and the Prime Minister is in safe hands with a brilliant team at St Thomas's Hospital, and the focus of the government will continue to be on making sure, at the Prime Minister's direction, all the plans for making sure that we can defeat coronavirus and pull the country through this challenge will be taken forward.
Are you confident, though, that the government is under control tonight?
There's an incredibly strong team spirit behind the Prime Minister and making sure that we get all of the plans that the Prime Minister has instructed us to deliver to get them implemented as soon as possible. And that's the way we'll bring the whole country through the coronavirus challenge that we face right now.
Just after 8 o'clock, the official statement came from Downing Street, saying over the course of this afternoon, the condition of the Prime Minister has worsened, and on the advice of his medical team, he's been moved to the intensive care unit at the hospital. The Prime Minister has asked the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, who is the first Secretary of State, to deputise for him where necessary. The Prime Minister is receiving excellent care and thanks all NHS staff for their hard work and dedication. The Prime Minister is now suffering seriously from a disease that does not pick and choose. Downing Street itself, a place where the virus spread. Power, no protection from harm.
Laura Koonsberg reporting. And in his daily briefing at the White House, President Donald Trump said he had sent his British counterpart his best wishes and offered the expertise of American pharmaceutical companies. He wouldn't expand on what exactly that means. He says he has no plans to physically separate from the Vice President, Mike Pence, to protect the US government, but nevertheless he will ramp up the testing of people around him.
Mike had his test a couple of days ago. I had my test a couple of days ago. So, no, I don't think so. But I think we'll probably, just because of questions like that, I think we'll probably have maybe quite a few tests. It's not the worst idea.
The number of deaths in the US is nearing 11,000, while almost 30,000 new positive cases were reported in the past 24 hours. To Australia now, an Australian Cardinal, George Pell, has walked free from prison today after the High Court of Australia quashed his child sexual abuse convictions. The former advisor to the Pope has been serving a 6-year sentence after a jury found him guilty of sexually abusing 2 boys while he was the Catholic Archbishop of Melbourne. This was Cardinal Pell's final avenue for appeal, and this morning a unanimous decision was handed down after 2 days of intense legal arguments. Now he cannot be retried. The ABC's Samantha Donovan has been following the 5-year legal saga.
After a lot of complex legal argument, in the end it's a pretty clear decision. The High Court has ruled unanimously that the jury back in December 2018 got it wrong. The High Court's found that acting rationally, the jury, looking at the whole of the evidence, ought to have had some doubt about Cardinal Pell's guilt on each of the 5 offences for which he was convicted. So the court has ordered that the convictions be quashed and verdicts of acquittal be entered in their place. Now, Cardinal Pell took his case to the High Court after losing his appeal in the Victorian Court of Appeal. That was a 2-1 majority decision. In this case, the big issue all along, right from the committal stage, is that there was one witness for the prosecution, the complainant, who said that he and another choir boy were abused by George Pell back in 96 and 97 in Melbourne's St Patrick's Cathedral. The second choir boy died a few years ago without ever having reported any abuse. So there was only one witness to say the offence has happened, whereas about 20 other witnesses who were at the cathedral on those relevant days gave evidence that the offending didn't happen or couldn't have happened. And those witnesses included church officials like the Master of Ceremonies, the sacristan who deals with the robes and the paraphernalia of the Mass, the choir boys and the choir master. They were the so-called opportunity witnesses, and they gave evidence that the practice of the new Archbishop of Melbourne, as George Pell was at the time, was to stand on the cathedral steps and speak to parishioners. That church practice required him to be have someone with him whenever he was robed, and that there were always people going in and out of the priest's sacristy for 10 to 15 minutes after the procession that ended Sunday Mass. So the High Court's ruled that even though the jury had found the complainant's evidence thoroughly credible and reliable, the evidence of those opportunity witnesses required a rational jury to have some reasonable doubt about the Cardinal's guilt. And the High Court judgment cites the words of the relevant case law, that there was a significant possibility that an innocent person had been convicted because the evidence did not establish guilt to the requisite standard of proof. And that standard, of course, is beyond reasonable doubt.
The ABC's Samantha Donovan. And after the decision was released, Cardinal Pell released a statement saying he holds no ill will towards his accuser. He's reiterated his innocence and says his trial should not be interpreted as a referendum on how church authorities in Australia have dealt with paedophilia. The Victoria Police say they respect the court's decision, yet will continue to provide support to the complainants involved in the case. Cardinal Pell, Australia's most senior Catholic, was the Vatican's treasurer, but was removed from the Pope's inner circle and placed on a leave of absence from the Vatican 3 years ago. With Cyclone Harold slowly moving away from Vanuatu, reports are slowly starting to emerge of the scale of the destruction there. The Category 5 storm tore across the country's northern and central islands yesterday, with winds in excess of 230 kilometres an hour. With phone services, internet and electricity severed to much of the country's north, it's proved difficult to ascertain just how bad things were for the tens of thousands of people who live in Harold's path. The storm struck Vanuatu's second largest town, Luganville, where ships were shunted ashore, roofs torn off houses and large buildings crumbled. The local MP, Matai Seramaai, says the damage is extensive.
They've reported no casualties at the moment. That almost 50 to 70% of the houses have lost the roof and got structural damage. The utilities, power is down, water, problem with water, and I think they're in dire needs now for shelter systems, and it's really bad. It's really bad. The Luganville population is around 16,000. We are more in 1,000 to 2,000 houses damaged.
The town is cut off from the rest of the Big Island, Santo, and reports from rural areas are yet to come in. But they were flooded days in advance of the cyclone, and this is likely to have made things worse. The coordinator of the Vanuatu Climate Action Network, Willie Misak, says it's a worrying time as they wait to hear anything.
At the moment, we are waiting for the clouds to clear a little bit and also the sea to calm a little bit so that we can start responding to our colleagues up north. But only the thing that we communicate through is through the satellite phone.
The Luganville MP, Matai Seramai, says he managed to speak briefly with someone in the Big Bay area via satellite phone, and they reported a grim tale.
Probably in 2 weeks' time they'll be out of food. All the shops are damaged. They can't move at the moment because all the water, the rivers are overflowing. They can't move to Luganville or anything. But the crops are really damaged.
And a spokesperson for Vanuatu's caretaker Prime Minister, Charlo Salwai, says the Council of Ministers is meeting today and a decision would be made on whether to ask for international help. That would involve relaxing the country's border restrictions, with the country effectively sealed off under a state of emergency to prevent the spread of COVID-19 to Vanuatu. Conditions of the country's lockdown have already been relaxed to allow people to travel to seek shelter and to congregate in evacuation centres, as hundreds did last night. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government is primed and ready to assist, and she's asked for more information from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, hundreds of cases of coronavirus and several deaths. The legal firm leading a class action against the owners of the Ruby Princess cruise liner say 6 hours was not enough time to clean the ship between voyages, and the fate of the passengers was predetermined. And when the country moves out of lockdown, what will Alert Level 3 bring, and what will it mean for takeaways? We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, let's get to the headlines with Paul Brennan.
Thanks, Lisa. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he's increasingly confident the lockdown is working to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Another 54 people are confirmed or probable cases of the virus, the lowest daily figure in 2 weeks. The Prime Minister says at any other time she would have sacked the Health Minister for breaching lockdown rules, but it would be too disruptive in the middle of the COVID crisis. David Clark will keep his position for now after admitting to driving 20 kilometres to a beach for a walk on the first weekend of the Level 4 alert. He's apologised and offered his resignation. Auckland Council has received thousands of requests for emergency food parcels during the lockdown. It set up a food distribution centre at Spark Arena to deal with the demand from people struggling to put food on the table. People are being reminded to stick to the lockdown rules and not head to batches and holiday homes over the Easter holiday weekend. The police will also be ensuring people aren't heading out on the water for any activities, including banned activities like fishing and swimming. Details are being finalised for a government-chartered Mercy flight to help dozens of New Zealanders stuck in Peru. A seat on the flight will cost just over $5,000. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says if people are struggling to pay for the flight, there could be some help available under certain circumstances. Australian Cardinal George Pell has walked free from prison after the High Court of Australia quashed his child sexual abuse convictions. He'd been serving a 6-year sentence after a jury found him guilty of sexually abusing 2 boys while he was the Catholic Archbishop of Melbourne. For the first time since January, China has reported no new coronavirus deaths or locally transmitted cases. And the lockdown on Wuhan, the city at the epicentre of the outbreak, is set to be lifted tomorrow. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome back. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, you've got a business confidence survey. Now, this is going to be interesting because was it taken sort of well after the lockdown started?
Yeah, partly. It encompasses part of that, but not all of it. In fact, just a little bit of it. So it's one of those surveys that is probably not as bad as it's going to get. It's one of those. We're going to get another survey from the ANZ tomorrow, which is a partial survey, which is going to show more of that. So this one is a sort of ahead of it. And it's a quarterly survey from the Institute of Economic Research. And they come up with this every 3 months. So this one shows that there was a net 67% had a more negative outlook for the business environment. That compared with a net 28% the quarter before, a drop of 40 points. That's a big number. And in terms of their own activity, businesses were also feeling quite negative there as well. The worst sectors were, not surprisingly, retail, for example, was one, and you would expect that to continue. So it's going to be worse. We're going to have more numbers tomorrow, which will give us a better idea of where we're heading, I suppose. But really, it's quite a downbeat survey. Not surprising. So,
but it's the first piece in the puzzle.
It's not something. Yeah, it's another piece of the puzzle. It does, I guess, confirm what we already knew. The bad news is out there. We're heading for a recession. The global outlook is also quite poor. But, you know, the market's holding up pretty well just the same. I think people are kind of taking it in its stride. You would have expected this to really take the wind out of the sail of the market, and it kind of did, perhaps. I mean, today we were up early on 2.8%, which is a pretty good NZX Top 50 Index, 2.8%. We were back above 10,000 points. Quite good. We finished the day about 0.5% up. But that was mostly because we were dragged down by Australia again. The rest of Asia is looking not too badly. In fact, I guess more people are believing that the worst might be over in Europe in terms of the COVID-19 deaths, and that perhaps it's maybe leveling off in some hot spots in the United States. And so that gave the market some, I guess, a bit of confidence. And so Asia's looking pretty good. So what did we end up at? The NZX Top 50 Index, we were I'm sorry, I don't have it all just in front of me like I usually do with my papers. We've got the NZX Top 50 Index up 46 points to 9,810. And that compared with the ASX being down about 1.7%. But, you know, the Nikkei was up and so was Hong Kong. And our dollar also doing quite well, stronger than it was yesterday, nearly back to 60 cents US at 59.8, 97.3 Australian. British pence, 48.7. We know that there has been some reaction to the Prime Minister being admitted to intensive care. We'll be watching that, I guess, overnight to see what happens. And I guess that's about all I've got for you today.
Thanks, Nona. That is Nona Peltier with our business news this afternoon. And lawyers looking to sue the owners of the COVID-soaked Ruby Princess cruise ship say compensation could run into the millions. The ship is Australia's single biggest source of coronavirus, with more than 600 cases and several deaths linked to the Ruby Princess. 16 cases of coronavirus in New Zealand are also connected to the cruise ship that's now the subject of a criminal investigation and a potential lawsuit. The cruise under investigation left Sydney late on March 8th and arrived back one day earlier than scheduled on the 19th, during which time a global pandemic was declared. Shine Lawyers is spearheading the case, and Vicky Anzalotos is the practice leader of Shine Lawyers' Class Actions Department. She says when sick passengers arrived in on the previous cruise, those on the next cruise weren't made aware the ship wasn't properly cleaned and their fate was predetermined.
Those questions involve, for example, why they let these people on the ship in the first place when they knew that on the previous cruise there were 160 people displaying symptoms consistent with COVID-19. With that knowledge in mind, it appears that they didn't warn the passengers coming on, and if they had warned them that there was a chance they could get sick, there's no way those passengers would have boarded that cruise ship. I mean, the other massive issues we see here are the failure to disclose by Carnival. They didn't, according to the accounts we've heard from passengers, at any stage disclose to the passengers that there were people on board the ship displaying flu-like symptoms consistent with coronavirus. And by doing that, they didn't give these people a chance to protect themselves, either by isolating themselves, wearing masks, or anything like that. So effectively, they got on the ship. You know, their fate was predetermined in a way because they weren't given any opportunity to protect themselves or to not go on that cruise.
There's a few things in there, Vicky. So let's start with the boarding of the cruise. You say there was about 160 cases on the cruise that was immediately prior to this one. Do you know if it was all the same crew crewing the boat?
No, we don't know that yet, but I'm assuming that will come out when the matter's investigated in Australia. And the government has recently announced that there will be a criminal investigation to the events that have occurred.
So once the cruise was underway, at what point did the ship's authorities become aware that some people were unwell?
We understand that several days into the cruise, some passengers reported to the ship's doctors that they were feeling unwell. So it was pretty early on in the cruise, according to the accounts of the passengers. So I think at that stage, people were told that if they did not feel well, they should report those symptoms, but they weren't at any stage told that there's a chance that they would contract the virus on board the ship, or any other steps that they should take to protect themselves.
So no link was made, as far as you know, between, say, flu-like symptoms that some passengers were suffering and COVID-19. The ship never publicly acknowledged that there was potentially a link here.
Not according to the accounts we've heard from passengers, no.
So when the boat finally got back to Sydney, there was some delays in the passengers coming off. What was known at that point when the passengers disembarked?
The passengers had no idea what was happening, according to the instructions that we've received from people that we've spoken to. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know why things were delayed. And in the end, they were basically rushed off the ship, which was unusual for cruise ships because usually there's a procedure for disembarking. But they report that they were rushed off, put into buses and told to leave, basically. None of them had health checks. Nothing like that happened.
Did they know that a pandemic had been declared? Because that obviously happened while they were on the sea.
I can't be certain, but I assume they would have known because, they all, read the news and so on and so forth. But also, before they embarked on the cruise, the World Health Organization had declared COVID-19 to be a public health emergency. So, they would have been aware of the seriousness, but no one had told them not to get on the cruise in the first place because there was a serious risk to their health.
So, where is the line between personal responsibility then, given that information was already in the public domain about this virus? People chose to still get on the ship. Where does the buck stop here?
Well, in our view, the buck stops with the cruisers, owners and operators. They knew what the situation was at the time. They knew that the World Health Organization had declared COVID-19 as a global health emergency. And let's not forget that their own other cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, had been quarantined off the Japanese coast for some time with many cases of coronavirus on board. So they would have known of the risks, and in our view, their duty was to inform oncoming passengers about the risks and give them the opportunity not to go on that cruise ship. In circumstances where they let them get on the cruise ship, then their duty was to inform the passengers of the risk that they may contract the virus on that ship. Another thing that should be said is about the fact that there were the sick people on the previous cruise. Hours later, they disembarked the passengers onto the new cruise. Now, given what we know about how long coronavirus lives on surfaces, it beggars belief that they had time to eradicate any virus that was on that ship. So in our view, there's many things that they ought to have done. The reports have come back that apparently they didn't do anything, but that will be further investigated in the investigations that have been ordered in Australia now.
Do you know the time between the first cruise disembarking and the second lot of passengers coming on board? How much time passed between that?
So the first cruise arrived in Sydney at 6 a.m. The passengers usually embark on the next cruise by sometime in the early afternoon. It was delayed. Apparently they got on at around 6 and the cruise then left at midnight. That's the timing that we understand happened.
So it's your belief that they couldn't have properly cleaned the ship in the time that was allowed between the two cruises?
Yes, that's right.
Given that it took 6 weeks to clean the Diamond Princess, what lessons has Carnival learnt from that?
Well, we'll have to see as the events unfold. But as I said before, in our view, it beggars belief that they could have sanitised the ship in the 6 to 8 hours between disembarking one cruise and embarking the other. I mean, when you have an outbreak aboard the ship, there are national and international sanitising protocols that have to be followed to eradicate a virus on the ship. And they include using virucidal cleaners in the rooms, cleaning doorknobs, remotes, window sills, steam cleaning carpets, steam cleaning beds and mattresses and things like that. It really beggars belief that they did that in between the two cruises.
Is there a suggestion that infected crew members may have spread this to passengers through food preparation?
Look, that's a possibility. I mean, everything's on the cards, I guess, and all that will come out in the course of the investigations, including in any proceedings that we commence. We assume that we will get access to the ship's records, and those facts will come to the fore at that time.
Where is the ship at the moment?
The ship is docked at Port Kembla, which is at Wollongong in New South Wales, a regional area. And they have docked it there so that health professionals can have easier access to any sick crew on board at the moment.
And Vicky, how long do you think your investigation will take?
Well, we're hoping to get it moving very quickly. We've had previous experience investigating the same company over 8 successive cruises where there was an outbreak of norovirus on the same ship. So we think we're in a position to advance things very quickly. And we do think it's important that the company is held to account for the, misery and tragedy that, has been caused to many of its passengers and their families.
What would be a good outcome for your clients?
Well, I mean, nothing can ever, compensate people for the loss of their loved ones. But companies like Carnival understand the payment of big amounts of money, and that's what we would be hoping to achieve in any class action that's commenced. Compensation for the passengers and their loved ones they have lost in adequate sums to compensate them for what they've been through.
And that is Vicky Ansalatos, who is with Shine Lawyers and is spearheading that potential class action against the Ruby Princess's owners. It is 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keep your feedback coming, lots of it already, particularly on the Health Minister David Clark. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to some of that feedback now. Firstly, this person says, says David Clark should be sacked as soon as this crisis is over. There were noticeably more people out today due to his appallingly irresponsible lead. I wonder how he can be in such a vital job with such extremely poor judgment. On the other hand, someone says, will you ask Simon Bridges if he will resign or apologise for his unnecessary repeated 700-kilometre drives? My father is elderly and unwell, and I can't drive 50 k's to Wellington to see him. He doesn't have a computer, unlike Simon Bridges. That's a reference to Simon Bridges travelling, obviously, from his Tauranga electorate to his pandemic select committee hearings in Wellington. Everybody else is dialing in on the internet for that. This person says, I looked at the website, no clear guidelines about limits or extent of exercise space. David Clark is a good minister, has expertise in health, respected by the profession, and who else could match that? What Shane Jones gets away with is so much more. Keep using the best people. He won't stray again, and we need his brain. Someone else, though, says the Clark situation says a lot about how shallow the government's talent pool is. Neither of the two Associate Health Ministers can step in. There's actually three, Jenny Salisa, Penny Henare and Julianne Genter. Better to cut him out now and move forward with confidence than leave him in position. It says a lot that while his health staff and other essential workers are working every hour available to him, that the Minister is at home with his family and has time for biking, walking and other pursuits. Maybe that's okay for the Conservation Minister, but not health. In the middle of a health emergency, why isn't he in Wellington with the PM and key leaders? Jacinda obviously didn't need him that much. I also think that's because of the bubble constraints, to be fair. And Maureen has got in touch to say the Prime Minister made a responsible, rational, astute move over David Clark for the safety of all New Zealanders. So keep that feedback coming. Text us 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. There are concerns for refugee families who might not be able to keep up with the rapidly evolving information coming out every day about COVID-19. There are 19 translations of basic information about COVID-19, and the alert level system on the COVID-19 website and the Red Cross says it is also hiring more translators. But with most of the country now at home, volunteers who work with refugees say they're having to completely change how they offer support. Logan Church reports.
Danny Mulhern is a Red Cross volunteer and she works with Fatma, a refugee from Somalia. Fatma arrived in New Zealand last year and Danny and another volunteer, Evie, would regularly meet up with her, help her go to appointments or just be a friendly face in a foreign country. But come the lockdown, that valuable face-to-face time was no longer possible.
Normally we would be going to visit her and spending time with her, but now that we can't do that because of the lockdown, it's just having to be through the phone, obviously. But I mean, we're still sending videos as well. We'll do FaceTime sometimes. So it's almost like being together, just touching base as often as possible so she knows that we're thinking about her.
Danny says Fatma seems to be doing well, with her English teacher making it clear to her what the new rules are. But Danny is concerned that other refugees are struggling to keep up with messaging from the government and health officials. On the government's COVID-19 website, basic information about COVID-19 and the alert level system are published in 19 languages, but only some of the daily public briefings are translated.
I think some more translating could be done for sure, yeah. I mean, for people that don't have a support group, I would be worried about how many people understand completely what's going on.
The Red Cross's General Manager for Migration, Rachel O'Connor, says accessing the latest information can be difficult for some of the communities they work with.
The first challenge is really around getting access to the information, and the situation is changing so quickly. There's such important information coming out, whether that's by the briefings that are happening each day over the news, information online about how to keep yourself safe. But of course, it's on the whole, it's mostly in English. So if you're not reading or writing in English, you're not going to get access to that information. So that's the big challenge. So we're translating material into over 15 different languages. Every time an update comes out, we're translating it and we're trying to get it out into the hands of people who need to hear that.
They've also ramped up their support of refugee communities.
So at the moment we're using all of our current refugee program staff, so that's everything from our social workers through to our interpreters, and then we also have a team of well over 1,200 volunteers around the country. So every single day we've got every family who's arrived in the last year is getting a phone call each day, either from one of the volunteers or from one of the staff, and of course one of the things we're having to increase significantly is the amount of interpreting we're using. So we've had to hire more staff who speak different languages to enable us to both translate written material, but also we're trying different ways like doing oral recordings of messages and sending them through WhatsApp groups to new families who have just arrived. So it's quite tricky, but there's lots of people helping, which has been great.
Meanwhile, the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, is confident the essential information is reaching everyone.
I think there is a big effort on ensuring that key information and resources is being translated. So I'll take that back and just I'm happy to get any information about specific communities that might feel the information could be coming out more quickly.
For Checkpoints, Logan Church.
As the COVID-19 lockdown continues, most schools, universities and workplaces are now online. But not everyone has access to the web. Internet companies and the government are working together to find solutions for more digital inclusion. Louise Tanuth reports.
Zoom meetings, emails, Skype and online lectures are now a daily reality. For most of us, it's as simple as logging on and pressing click. Though not everyone is this fortunate. According to Internet New Zealand, 2017 data shows around 34,000 New Zealanders do not have access to the internet. Digital Inclusion Aotearoa are trying to change that by partnering with Spark to offer Wi-Fi to low socio-economic communities. Operations Director and Trustee of Digital Inclusion Aotearoa, Lawrence Wimpfer, says since the lockdown, demand has exploded.
So it's a program we've been running for 3 years, but it's accelerated in the last 2 weeks, going from 1,500 sign-ups a year to we've had 1,500 sign-ups in 2 weeks.
Those who qualify receive a little box with its own SIM card, and once plugged in, they're on the internet. Just $5 gives 30 gigs of data a month, enough to learn online, but not binge-watch Netflix. Lawrence Wimpfer says it's been a huge effort to run things from home.
My family here is locked. We're self-isolated here in Wellington, so on the evenings we spend our day packing modems into bags and getting them ready for the courier the next day.
Telecommunications company Chorus also announced they will connect 50,000 households currently living without internet. It is not just big companies making a difference, it's people too. Marurewa resident Luella Lineker is using social media to encourage those who have unlimited Wi-Fi to share with those who don't have any. She says it is a simple process that will reap benefits.
Open up a different channel that's a public channel, and you can actually monitor what's going on or who's on there, so you can make sure that your things are safe, and just keeping the information to your neighbours means that it's only a small group of people that are able to access it that can help.
Lineker says it is all about working towards the same goal.
This is an opportunity for New Zealand to reset and do things differently. Whānau to whānau is a way that we can start to support different outcomes.
As classrooms are now online, an internet connection is required in exchange for learning. Central North Island Fibre Company, Ultrafast Fibre, is waiving its monthly charges for families with school-aged children living without broadband for the next 6 months. Nearly 2,000 homes have already benefited from the service. CEO John Hanna explains how it is done.
So internet fibre running all the way to the house, and maybe have been used by a previous tenant or a previous house owner. When they move out, those connections become terminated or inactive. The physical connection is still there, but the logical connection needs to be reset and refired up. So that's the process that we've undertaken.
The service could allow households to save up to $600 each month, and John Hanna says teachers are next in line. Other companies are also doing their bit. Vodafone has introduced unlimited data for some rural customers on fixed wireless plans and says they are being patient with late payment fees and excess data charges, along with Spark and 2 Degrees. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Louise Tanuth aho.
Time for some of your feedback before the news at 6. A lot of you getting in touch about David Clark, the Health Minister. This person says, I think it is harsh. The rules have kept changing over time. He's a family man, probably trying to have some private time going to the beach the first weekend. The bike ride may have pushed the boundaries, but really to lose his job, silly. He is sincerely apologetic. Simon Bridges drove to Wellington when he could have avoided it also. Sack him too, says that person. Someone else says it's a bit rich for Simon Bridges to be taking the high ground. Photographed shaking hands in a supermarket a week ago, and this week literally boasting about his right as opposition leader to ignore lockdown rules and drive between Wellington and Tauranga. How many stops does he make en route? And in doing so, how many other bubbles does he burst? Time for Simon to show a little leadership too, methinks, says Max. Mary says, to be fair, David Clark, regarding David Clark, that she and others found earlier messaging re-exercise somewhat vague and open to interpretation. He has been punished. Now we need to support him and let him get on with his job. Another one, direct and to the point, says Clark should go. Had he shown real leadership during the crisis, that would be different. But he's just been a figurehead.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister is expressing confidence and cautious optimism in the downward trend of new coronavirus cases. Another 54 people were today classified as confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19, the lowest daily figure in 2 weeks. That compares to 65 more people who are deemed to have recovered from the virus in the past 24 hours. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he's increasingly confident the lockdown is working, and Jacinda Ardern has reiterated that, saying she is quietly confident and cautiously optimistic. The total number of cases is 1,160. 12 people are in hospital, with one in critical condition. The Prime Minister says at any other time she would have sacked the Health Minister for breaching lockdown rules, but it would be too disruptive in the middle of the COVID crisis. David Clark will keep his position for now after admitting to driving 20 kilometres to a beach for a walk on the first weekend of the Level 4 alert. He's apologised and offered his resignation. Jacinda Ardern says his actions are unacceptable, but she's made a necessary decision.
Simply put, I determined that we cannot afford massive disruption in the health sector or to our response, because David Clark continues to possess what we require as our Health Minister to take on COVID-19.
Jacinda Ardern says David Clark has been stripped of his cabinet ranking and associate finance portfolio. The National Party backs her position for now, but says it will be unsustainable once the lockdown has finished. For the first time since January, China has reported no new coronavirus deaths. Tomorrow, the lockdown on Wuhan, the city at the epicentre of the outbreak, will be lifted. Here's our foreign news reporter Max Toll.
It's a significant milestone in the city's battle against the virus. Residents will also be allowed to leave Wuhan if they have received a QR code on their phones from the provincial government. Yesterday, China reported no new deaths or even locally transmitted cases. The 32 new infections were all from overseas. In total, the National Health Commission says there has been almost 82,000 active cases and 77,000 people have recovered. This is Max Toll.
A recent law change means doctors are able to courier early medical abortion pills to pregnant women after a telephone consultation. Dunedin abortion provider Dr. Helen Patterson says this enables women who are less than 9 weeks pregnant to avoid hospitals and abortion clinics during the COVID-19 outbreak.
Provided people fit the criteria, and we need to go through that and talk to people and do shared informed consent and obviously offer women counselling. But all of that can be done through telemedicine. And then if they fit all the safety criteria, then we could actually just send them a courier package.
District health boards offering the service include Southern, Whanganui, Mid-Central and Wairarapa. Prior to the law change, the pills needed to be taken on the premises of a licensed abortion clinic between 24 and 48 hours apart. Cardinal George Pell has been driven to a church property in Melbourne after being freed from prison. Earlier today, the High Court in Australia quashed his child sexual abuse convictions. Here's the ABC's Stephanie Ferrier.
After more than a year behind bars, Cardinal Pell says a serious injustice has been remedied. In a statement, he says he doesn't want his acquittal to add to the hurt and bitterness many feel, adding his trial was not a referendum on the Catholic Church. Cardinal Pell was convicted of sexually abusing 2 choir boys when he was Archbishop of Melbourne in the 1990s. But the High Court unanimously ruled the jury ought to have entertained a doubt about his guilt. Lawyers acting for the father of the deceased choir boy say their client is gutted and in utter disbelief at the decision.
Stephanie Ferrier reporting. Auckland Council is cutting all non-essential work to mitigate the financial impacts of COVID-19. The Council's Chief Executive, Stephen Town, says external contracts for non-essential work have been paused over the past 2 weeks to keep costs down. Affected work includes event operations, non-essential asset management and business improvement projects. Mr Town says the cuts will affect an unknown portion of the Council's 1,100 casual workers, some of whom will be eligible for the government's wage subsidy package. The Mayor Phil Goff says the cuts are tough but necessary measure as the lockdown has significantly reduced the Council's revenue. He says the Council will continue to invest in essential expenditure but cannot pay for work that can't be done. It's 6:04. Sport now, All Black Richie Mo'unga has been caught out in what he says was an inadvertent breach of the COVID-19 lockdown rules, but he knows he can be a better role model. Mo'unga and some of his Crusaders teammates were training at the same time at the same public park in Christchurch yesterday and were seen kicking and passing a ball amongst themselves. Sharing of equipment of any kind with people outside your bubble is not permitted under physical distancing. But Mo'unga says when he picked up the ball to throw it back to his teammates, it was something so instinctive for him to do.
I didn't think twice about it. Something that happened fast and something that I've learnt that even, my natural instincts I need to be more careful of. It doesn't excuse the fact that there were 2 other bubbles that were passing around the ball together, and it doesn't excuse the fact that I can be better and being a better role model and telling the boys that, hey, look, you guys are done, you guys should head home now. And I am so for that.
Richie Mo'unga apologising. That's the news.
First, there was story time on RNZ, the searchable site full of stories for little kiddies and kitties. But that wasn't enough.
Give us what we want!
The kids cried. What? You don't mean...
Yes, a podcast!
And so it happened. The podcast. They called it The Best of Story Time.
The Best of Storytime, the podcast for little kids and kids on the podcast page, rnz.co.nz.
Now the short forecast updated just over an hour ago by Met Service, taking us to midnight tomorrow Wednesday. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Isolated showers, widespread for a time tomorrow, possibly heavy in Northland. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud, showers from midday tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, that includes the central high country, also Wairarapa. Isolated showers today, rain for a time tomorrow morning, then mainly fine. Kapiti and Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, apart from Kaikoura Coast. Isolated showers, and then rain for a time this evening, becoming fine tomorrow. Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, isolated showers, clearing north of Christchurch in the morning. Otago, a few showers, mainly coastal, clearing up this evening. Showers returning tomorrow evening. Bulla and Westland, mainly fine, but the odd shower about Bulla. Cloud and showers spreading again north tomorrow afternoon and evening. Fiordland and Southland, showers mainly about the coast, becoming more widespread, possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon. And to the Chathams, cloudy periods, the odd shower, rain there later tomorrow. Just after 6:07.
Thanks, Paul, and kia ora anō. You're listening to Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government is cautiously optimistic the level 4 lockdown restrictions are working. For the first time since the outbreak, the Director General of Health has confirmed larger numbers of recovered patients than new cases of COVID-19. Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says 65 people have recovered from COVID-19 in the last day. Charlotte Cook reports.
The total number of people with COVID-19 now sits at around 1,160 after the confirmation of 54 new cases. But this is a notable slump in the rise after 2 weeks of daily jumps of around 70 to 80 cases. The Prime Minister says this drop suggests the level 4 lockdown is working.
We are testing more and more people, and the growth in the number of new cases remains relatively consistent. While I still urge caution, this does suggest that what we are doing as a nation is working.
Jacinda Ardern says data scientist John McDermott has echoed this.
He said over the next day or so, we could continue to see the impacts of Alert Level 4. He says, quote, when numbers start to fall, that is the first indication your interventions are working. John explains we need to go through 3 phases. You start with our outbreak, then secondly, you want linear, and thirdly is the phase where you see cases start to fall.
Both Jacinda Ardern and John McDermott say they are cautiously positive about the figures. And the Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, agrees.
We've seen in the last few days the number of close contacts of each of our new cases has dropped down to 2 or 3, reflecting the fact that we are in the alert level 4, so people are in small groups, and so the number of close contacts they have is very small.
Dr Bloomfield says New Zealand's mortality rate is also far lower than other countries. Meanwhile, Jacinda Ardern says the government is seeking legal advice around the cruise ship Ruby Princess's trips to ports around New Zealand. She says Hawke's Bay is paying the price for its visit, with a number of cases from those who had close contact with its passengers. Australia has launched a criminal inquiry, and Jacinda Ardern says she's asked for advice on whether New Zealand should also take action.
I have asked Minister Parker to seek legal advice from Crown Law as to whether or not the Ruby Princess while in New Zealand fulfilled all of its obligations, because of course we are now suffering the consequences of cases here in New Zealand as a result of that cruise ship.
Jacinda Ardern says to move out of level 4, there are 3 areas that need to be watertight, all of which she admits need more work.
Border restrictions, the work on contact tracing, and of course just general use of isolation and quarantining is a part of that. On border restrictions, I've already indicated that we will continue to ramp those up, and we'll be doing that shortly. On contact tracing, the Director General's talked about the extra support we're putting in there.
She says the ministry is also bringing in Dr Aisha Viral, an infectious diseases physician from Otago University, to audit the contact tracing process and give assurances that enough is being done. Despite these small and early successes, the Prime Minister and Dr Bloomfield are reminding New Zealanders to continue to play by the rules. The upcoming Easter holiday doesn't lessen the level of restriction, with Dr Bloomfield even suggesting an extended staycation. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
The UK Prime Minister, who initially advocated herd immunity as part of his government's response to COVID-19, tonight remains in intensive care in a London hospital. Boris Johnson was admitted to St Thomas's Hospital in central London late on Sunday when his condition deteriorated after suffering from coronavirus symptoms for about 10 days. He was moved to an intensive care unit overnight. CNN correspondent Nick Patton-Walsh joins us now from Downing Street. Nick, what is the latest on the Prime Minister's condition?
Well, I have to tell you, overnight we've received no extra information as to his condition. The last information coming out was reports that he was receiving oxygen treatment, and a lengthy statement from Downing Street, which towards the end of it raised a somewhat troubling situation that he was in ICU as a precaution should he, quote here, should he require assistance from a ventilator. Now, of course, Prime Minister being on assisted breathing like that would be an exceptionally serious development indeed. But the latest statements from Downing Street will suggest that he is conscious. But there has, of course, been a time lag and, of course, considerations of his own medical privacy and national security in terms of the information that has been handed out by Downing Street over the past very complex 36 hours. Any government at all losing its Prime Minister to a medical situation like this is an exceptionally complicated task. But yesterday, when we heard from the man currently standing in his place, quote, where necessary, as is the current words being used by the British government to describe how Dominic Raab, the former Foreign Secretary, who is now standing in as First Secretary of State in Boris Johnson's role. He stood in front of the British public late yesterday afternoon and said that Boris Johnson had had, quote, a comfortable night in hospital pretty much at the same time where his doctors were advising he was being moved swiftly into an intensive care unit. This is a position that no government ever wants to be in, to have to actually accept that your leader firstly requires a hospital admission, as we heard 36 hours ago. Back then, they said it was for precautionary tests to ensure he was getting the best medical care, and then to have to update the public 24 hours later to say, in fact, he is now being moved to an intensive care unit. Exceptionally grave times indeed for the British government. They have key decisions ahead in the next week or so as to whether to continue the lockdown on movements for the British public to try and stop the flow of COVID-19 within the population. They've had some possible good news in the past few days, suggesting that perhaps the number of cases isn't rising at the same speed that it had been in the past. And
I think we may have just lost Nick there. That was Nick Patton-Walsh updating us on the situation with Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, who is still in St Thomas's Hospital in central London, and he is in an intensive care unit, as Nick was saying there, in case he needs further assistance breathing. We do know from earlier reports he was receiving oxygen. It is almost 14 minutes after 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Hereford Association of New Zealand president says he was denied a test for COVID-19 despite having shaken hands with 500 people plus during the World Hereford Conference last month in Queenstown. The conference, which was held between March 9 and March 13, was attended by 400 delegates, and it was during this time a global pandemic was declared. It is now the source of the country's fourth biggest cluster, with 35 people testing positive for COVID-19 who are connected to the event. Colin Corney was running the show. He says he showed no symptoms but was refused a test. He says others have also shown no symptoms and they've tested positive for COVID-19. Colin joins me now. Colin, you've not had symptoms, but are you a little bit worried about this, whether you have it or not?
Good evening, Lisa. And I suppose it's always something in the back of your mind, especially that I've talked to a lot of people who were tested positive, and they advised me they were actually taking their partner in to be tested because they had every symptom that you could imagine. However, they tested negative and they were tested and tested positive. So I dare say there's a number of people who don't show symptoms but may be positive.
Colin, a lot of people wouldn't have heard of your group before, but you're hitting the headlines now, and you were running the show. We just want to get a bit of an idea of how this might have spread. So, I mean, who was there, and what did you get up to during this Hereford conference?
So, Lisa, I suppose the worst part for us is it's put a bit of a damper on an event that was outstanding. I have to say, it was just fantastic. We had visitors from 18 different countries that joined us to look and see the splendour of New Zealand and understand what we do in New Zealand so well. And that's agriculture, not high end, mainly grass and silage. And so it's a different type. So what we did, we wanted to demonstrate our beautiful country. So we held a pre-conference tour. So around about 120 people arrived right back on the 4th of March, and they did a quick tour through the North Island and then joined us in Queenstown on the 8th. So the conference itself started on the 10th, is when the actual conference, we had a bit of a welcoming on the evening of the night, and we went through to, unfortunately, Friday the 13th. But the conference itself demonstrated how New Zealand agriculture works well. What a great place, Queenstown, Wanaka, all that basin there. For overseas guests, they were just gobsmacked. And it was really great.
But Colin, during that time, a pandemic was declared. Were you aware of that at the time?
So it's quite interesting, Lisa. Even as far as the 28th of February, we contacted the Ministry of Health just to double-check that it was okay for us to carry on. At that point, New Zealand wasn't in a lockdown. So we also need to understand that we weren't the only event on.
And what did they say to you, Colin?
So at that stage, they advised that everything was okay. So we ourselves took different measures to make sure. So on all the coaches, we put hand washers, we put alcohol wipes and things for people to use as they hopped on and off the coaches. And we advised people to just ensure that they kept a good hygiene practice. However, when you have a conference like this, and they run every 4 years, and different countries will host them, we were very fortunate to host this one, and I'll never put that out of our mind that we were very fortunate to host it. And, you've got a lot of people from around the world that haven't seen each other for 4 years, so obviously they shake hands and they hug and they do everything else. But as a lot of people know, when you go to a conference and there's technical events, you don't stay for each one. And when you're in a beautiful place like Queenstown, a lot of people spent part of the day in town and doing other things. So they mixed and mingled.
So they went far and wide, Colin. You were all happy to see each other. So you're hugging, shaking hands, talking up close, and then going on all your separate trips to different locations, some around the country and others around Queenstown. I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you called the Ministry of Health, can you remember around what date that was? And they told you it was okay to go ahead, did they?
Oh, so we checked. We wanted to just make sure everything was right back on the 28th of February. And that's before it was New Zealand was still open, everything was still fine. We just wanted to make sure, because that was really our go, no-go. People were already starting to travel, and so that was our key. And at that point, we were, New Zealand wasn't in lockdown, the world was probably watching and not really taking it as serious as we do today. I'm not
understood.
Just followed what we were,
As you got closer to the event, did you have any misgivings about going ahead?
No, we were just checking in on advice and making sure. New Zealand, I think at that stage, had only 2 or 3, which was one family in Auckland. And we asked people if they were not well to consider not attending. And during the time there, and I would have shaken hands with 500 people probably.
Did any of them seem unwell, Colin?
No, not at all. So we went through the conference, and it was really, really great. A lot of great overseas presenters and guest speakers. And then I actually personally took a group, which is our post tour. So we went through the lower South Island. And then on Tuesday the 17th, I think it is, I got a phone call from my colleague or counterpart in Australia to advise that a person that had attended back on Tuesday and Wednesday had tested positive.
Had you shaken hands with that person, Colin?
Oh, more than likely. More than likely. I don't think there was many I didn't. So what we did, I actually had 4 coaches, about 150 odd people. And when I got off the phone, I actually parked all those coaches up. It was quite funny. We were having a fantastic day. The weather, the South Island was just put on beautiful weather, lovely countryside, beautiful animals. And I got the phone call, so we went and I parked everyone up in a wool shed and told that no one was allowed to leave until I got some advice. So I had run the 0800, the helpline, and I have to say they were really good. They escalated it through to 3 or 4 different people, and then we spoke to a person who advised us to then drive to our accommodation, which was going to be a 2.5-hour drive. And then they rang me before we got there, and they had already at that point spoken to the person in Australia that was deemed positive. And they'd gone through all of their travel and everything and advised us at that point it was unlikely that that person was in a contagious state during the 2 days they were with us.
Yet a whole bunch of you then later turned out to have COVID-19. So do you know much about how everyone is doing who's had it?
Yes, so I've been very busy. So I have spoken to everyone that I know that has been proven positive, and I've spoken to many others that haven't. So knowing that I had the list and the age group, anyone that I felt was at an age group that could be a risk, I phoned all of those on numerous days to make sure they were okay. It's interesting, some of the people I phoned, so we went to a couple of farms, for instance, where they would have had probably 20 to 25 staff and neighbours helping them to showcase their property and everything. And one person was deemed positive, and they tested everyone else, and no one else was positive. So it's obviously, if your immune system's at the level you're vulnerable, or your immune system's at a level where you seem to miss it.
Colin, looking back on this, hindsight's a great thing, but do you reckon all that could have been done to contain this was done? At the time you hear that someone overseas is tested positive and you've got your busloads of people, was everything done that could be done to lock you all down and not spread this thing any further?
So we stopped. We went back to our hotel. We told everyone, so we still had a farm and a couple of big stations to visit the next day. We did not go. We actually stopped that day. So once we were advised, we went to our accommodation, and the next day we had a meeting, and myself and my breed manager, or general manager, we had a phone call with the Ministry of Health, and they advised us at that point still, because at that point there was still this one person, that our risk factor was low. And so we said, so what do we do with these people today? And we said we were thinking they could go for a coach tour around Christchurch. And we were advised at that time that's fine. The next day everyone went home.
You were told that was fine to go on the coach tour the next day?
Yeah, so we just went around the city. We didn't do much else but go from the motel, hotel to the coach.
Hey, it's been great.
Not everyone did it, but
it's been great.
We all went home.
It's been great to talk to you, Colin. We're almost out of time. Can you quickly tell me why they wouldn't give you a test?
Just that I had no symptoms at all.
Appreciate.
And neither did my wife.
That's good. That's good for you both. Any chance you could still go and get a test?
Probably now, but I have been in lockdown for over 3 weeks.
Right.
I'm not sure what it's going to tell you.
You're in the clear, it sounds like, then, if you've been in isolation for 3 weeks. Really appreciate your time.
So.
Thank you, Colin. That is Colin Corney, who was running the show at the World Hereford Conference. And we know that there's been, well, that's our fourth biggest cluster there. 35 people connected with that event have tested positive for COVID-19. Colin is not one of them. For most New Zealanders, there's nothing more comforting than grasping a bulging bag of fish and chips to the chest on the Friday walk home. It's literally heartwarming. But right now, the fish and potato industries are facing financial strain since the restaurants and takeaway shops closed as part of the bid to contain COVID-19. They are pinning their hopes on a drop in alert levels after 4 weeks. But there's confusion about what the rules for takeaways will be when the country comes out of level 4 lockdown. Hamish Cardwell reports.
It's a cherished tradition, the Friday night fish and chip run. But right now, the industries behind the weekly treat are taking a battering. New Zealand produces 500 million kilograms of potatoes each year, and half that ends up as frozen chips, with the vast majority being sold to takeaway shops and restaurants. The head of Potatoes New Zealand, Chris Claridge, says people making do by whipping up their greasies at home has increased its supermarket sales. But that's nowhere near enough.
That hasn't made up for a drop in demand from the hospitality sector and the food service sector, which has essentially gone to zero.
Mr. Claridge says without the chip shops and restaurants, growers will have to cut back planting, which could hurt the industry long term. Right now, it's unclear what the rules are for fish and chip shops when it comes to reopening under the level 3 restrictions. Mr. Claridge says he wants the chippers back in action as soon as the alert level drops.
Because that allows people, at least from home, to get access to hot chips in your suburban local fish and chip shop. It's local, it's easy walking distance, they can take orders by phone. It's having those sorts of outlets available for the industry is crucial for our long-term function.
The $1.8 billion a year seafood export industry has taken a massive hit with disruptions to international trade. Seafood NZ's Chief Executive Jeremy Helson says demand for seafood here has dropped significantly as well.
I can't put a figure on it at this stage, but it's certainly pretty significant. Obviously, a lot of fish wholesalers that sell direct to the public have been hit by this. You know, fish and chips and, of course, the restaurant trade. Seafood being more of your premium protein, a lot of that goes into food service So a lot of that demand has eased off domestically as well.
Lulu and her husband own Islington Fish and Chips in Christchurch. She says thankfully their rent is cheap and it's just the two of them working the shop, so they'll be able to weather the shutdown.
Like pretty enjoy the time for have a rest.
But she says the larger stores with more staff might not make it through.
We had a friend and he got quite lots people work for him. It's gonna be very hard for him.
The Restaurant Association Chief Executive Marissa Boudoir says in a statement they expect 1 in 5 hospitality businesses will close permanently because of the coronavirus pandemic, with half likely to be wiped out in the tourist hotspots. Ms. Boudoir says her understanding is that takeaway outlets can operate under Level 3, but that talks are underway with officials about what exactly the rules will be for the hospitality sector when the country moves out of Level 4 lockdown. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell tēnei.
Nothing quite says it's the end of the week like hot chips. Sigh. Oh well, only 2 more weeks to go. That is all we've got time for tonight on Checkpoint. Thank you for joining us on radio or television, however you chose to connect with us today. Don't forget, you can go back online if you missed some of our video stories. Nick Munro, Nita Blake-Person's story about the big food bank being set up in Spark Arena. Really interesting pictures. Check it out online. All our interviews will be there too. Our news team will keep you up to date overnight. And of course, Morning Report will be back with you tomorrow morning. We'll catch you tomorrow night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. 2 sources close to the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson say there has been no change in his condition. A law change means women under 9 weeks pregnant will be able to receive early medical abortion pills at home after a consultation with their doctor. The president of the Hereford Association says he was denied a COVID-19 test despite having shaken over 500 hands during the World Hereford Conference last month. New Zealanders are being reminded to take a staycation over the Easter holiday weekend and abide by the lockdown rules. And foreign nationals needing to get home will be allowed to transit through New Zealand's airports under strict new regulations. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Tonight on Nights, international relations in the time of COVID-19 with Nina Hall from Johns Hopkins University. Will it bring on a renaissance of global cooperation or add more fuel to the xenophobic